Hi, and welcome to another entry of our clinical massage vlogging series. I'm Shane Epperly. I get asked all the time, what is a trigger point? And to give someone a quick understanding, not an in-depth study of what a trigger point is, I usually start with a description of the muscle tissue, which of course is where the trigger point resides. A muscle is made up of millions of teeny cables, and each of these cables contracts and relaxes, creating the action of the muscle in its normal, healthy state. When you overload a muscle with stress, repetitive action, injury, or some other factor, it develops trigger points or knots in the individual cables or fibers of that muscle. And when you collect enough of these knots, it tips the muscle into dysfunction. Now that's an oversimplified explanation of what is happening, and it's still a bit superficial in its description, and it doesn't really answer the question of what is a trigger point. So let's back up a bit and talk about that knot. A great analogy that I like to use is a knot in a piece of string. Though the muscle fiber is not actually tied up. I'll get to what is actually happening in the muscle in a moment. There are quite a few similarities between what happens to a piece of string with a knot tied in it and a muscle in a knotted state. For example, muscles that are triggered usually feel, and are, tight and restricted. A loss of range of motion has occurred. And most folks say to us, if I could just stretch it out, I'd feel so much better. But pulling on the ends of a knotted piece of string only makes the knots tighter, and likewise stretching a muscle that's full of knots will only entrench the knots further. Don't get me wrong, now stretching is great, and it's a critical component. I'm actually really big on stretching, but just not before the trigger points are released. I'll talk more on trigger points and stretching in another episode. Another element of this analogy is the fact that tying a knot in a piece of string shortens it ever so slightly. A similar effect happens in the muscle. Even if there are knots tied in only a few of those fibers out of millions that make up the muscle belly itself, the muscle loses a little bit more of its ability to perform its action with every teeny knot that's formed. What is happening in the muscle on a microscopic level is that the teeny contractile structures that make up the muscle fibers, called sarcomeres, have become overstimulated or stuck in the contraction state. To oversimplify, they are stuck in the on position and can't shut off or relax. This is at the heart of what a trigger point is. Imagine your car idling in your closed garage and you can't shut it off. It's going to continue to burn gas and expel carbon monoxide. Pretty soon your garage is going to be full of toxic fumes. Well, that's similar to the environment that a trigger point creates in a muscle. Now, once you have a trigger point in a muscle, the area surrounding the knot becomes an area of high metabolic activity and low circulation. This is important because it means that the waste byproduct is pooling in the area and causing stagnation. Just like that car in the garage, filling the garage with toxic fumes that can't escape. The triggered muscle fibers are stuck in a constant state of contraction and are creating metabolic waste that can't escape that area. When a muscle fires, it uses energy, ATP. Of course, burning any fuel creates waste byproduct, and this situation is no exception. In this case, the waste byproduct is lactic acid. Now, under ideal conditions, blood is bringing in new oxygen to the muscle fibers and carrying away the old waste byproduct, the lactic acid. But the environment has changed thanks to the trigger point. The presence of the trigger point causes the area to become tight and not easily accessible to the supply chain. This environment irritates the surrounding muscle fibers next to the triggered fibers, and they too become triggered as well. Add to this the element of repetitive action or stress that is calling for the muscle to hold a particular position, such as typing on a computer, and you have the perfect conditions for trigger point development. Now, the triggered muscle can still function, just not to its fullest ability. Get enough trigger points in that muscle and it tips that muscle into what we call dysfunction, meaning its ability to do a particular action is limited, and the muscle may display pain, weakness, even inhibited range of motion. When you have a muscle that is dysfunctional, the body, in an attempt to be efficient, calls in other muscles to help the dysfunctional muscle do its job. Now, these muscles usually have a similar action to the dysfunctional muscle, and so they can help out. But these muscles are now carrying more of the load, doing, well, double duty, and can only sustain this work for short periods of time, not indefinitely. So these helper muscles fatigue quickly, and they in turn develop trigger points as well. The body keeps calling in more help, and you're now into a vicious cycle, which we call a complex. This all sounds so ominous, but that is where massage comes in to save the day. What we as massage therapists do in a nutshell is reset the muscle. We help facilitate the flushing of the tissue with blood by massaging the muscle and bringing in a fresh supply of much needed oxygen and collecting the waste byproduct and flushing it out of the area. To revisit our car analogy, we open up the garage door and turn off the ignition. Now everyone has trigger points. It's just a matter of whether they've reached a critical tipping point, which causes you to be more aware of them. That awareness can take the form of pain, weakness, stiffness, decreased range of motion, dysfunction, and even sometimes numbness, tingling, and other sensations. Well, that pretty much answers the question as to what is a trigger point. Thanks for joining us for another edition of our Clinical Massage Therapy vlog. Be sure to join us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, where we discuss all kinds of topics related to the practice and business of clinical massage therapy. And to keep updated on our new vlog entries, subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you'll find by searching for Tiger Lily Studios, with no spaces, on YouTube. Be well and keep in touch.